Okay. Let me share. Okay, my slides are visible, yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, cool. All right, 11:05. Okay. So thank you, Jillian, for hosting our session, and thank you everyone for attending. So you on a piece of paper, CVs, resumes, and cover letters. Everyone here is familiar to some degree with application materials. You had to submit either a CV or resume, cover letter in order to get your job with the TAMU system. That being said, not everybody is as familiar with all components as others. And it seems like a lot of best practices are not necessarily being taught, as I've noticed in the last year of the hiring that we've been doing. So we decided we needed to do a presentation on it. There might also be some questions about kind of why is this relevant after you've already kind of gotten the job. But you should always be prepared for new opportunities. And there are a lot of situations in academia, in libraries, where addition to applying for a new job, you might need to use application materials. For example, applying for internal jobs. So TAMU College Station has 70 positions in the hiring queue right now, about 40 that are in the active queue, and the rest are in pre-processing. So there are a lot of positions even within the TAMU system that are available right now, even outside the College Station campus. If you're applying for promotion, you might need to submit in a CV or a resume. Some people like you to submit stuff for evals. If you're applying for membership for professional committees or working groups, you might need to submit application materials. I just recently applied to be a peer reviewer for a journal and had to submit my CV and a letter of interest. There's situations like SACS, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, which is an accreditation body, and they may ask for staff CVs for the accreditation process. Applying for grants. There's a lot of different things in our kind of realm that you still need a CV, resume, and cover letter to use.
Right. Okay.
There's also, like I said, a lot of hiring happening. So if you've never been on a hiring committee before, it's likely that you may be in the near future. And so it's good to kind of know about some of these best practices and things to kind of look for when you're on a hiring committee. Okay. So before we really get into the meat of the presentation, if you do have a CV or a resume available or accessible for you, I encourage you to pull it up so that you can kind of look at what your current CV looks like, and see if there's anything you might want to update or change based on the contents of this presentation. So who are we, and why did we think that this needed its own presentation? So my name's Bonnie Gardner, and I'm the coordinator of web and user experience at the TAMU College Station campus. And I am kind of fired up about this topic because, well, for two reasons. One, as I mentioned, we are doing a lot of hiring right now. My team is a new team, and I am having to hire all new people for my unit. And as I've been reviewing application materials, I've been kind of appalled at the quality of materials that have been submitted. And a lot of it just kind of very basic sort of resume CV 101 kind of things that can be easily updated to make it better. Two, I came here from the public sector. I was a public librarian before coming to Texas A&M. And when I applied for this position, I had very little understanding about what the difference was between a CV and a resume and how they should be structured different, what information should be different on there. So I really had to kind of, get on Google and search for CV templates. And even then, I think what I ultimately submitted was really more of a resume than a CV. So hopefully we can help clear that up for other people that might be a little unsure. Kelly, how about you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Hoppy, and I am the Associate Director and Head of Outreach and Instruction at Cornett Library, West Texas A&M University, which is in Canyon up in the Panhandle near Amarillo. This is my 33rd year in education. This is my 8th year as an academic librarian, and before that, I was a school librarian for 14 years. Before that, a classroom teacher teaching mostly 6th, 7th, and 8th grade language arts. I am currently TLA's College and University Libraries Division Chair-elect. So if you are involved in COLD, I look forward to working with you all also over the upcoming year. So the first time I remember hearing the acronym CV was about 10 years ago when I was a school librarian. At that point, I had been a professional for about 20 years. I had been adulting for a while, so it was sort of a surprise to me that I had never heard of this acronym. As a K-12 educator, I had only ever heard of or used resumes. I don't really remember writing cover letters either. What I do remember when applying for K-12 jobs was having to put almost everything that was in my resume into an online application, which seemed redundant, was frustrating, and time consuming. When I applied for an academic position, I still submitted a resume. In fact, that's what the application asked for. Now I know that is because librarians at Cornett are considered a staff, and CVs tend to lean toward academic tenure type positions. One thing that was somewhat new to me, though, was writing a cover letter, so I researched that. Now that I understand how the academic hiring process works, I feel pretty certain that my cover letter was what scored me the points and moved me on to the next step in the process, especially since I did not have any academic library experience. My cover letter was the thing that really laid out the details, explaining that I did have the necessary skills and experience to get the job done. So now we're going to move to a Padlet. And what we would like to do now is ask that you either use this link or the QR code and go to the Padlet and type in any questions, comments, or concerns that you may have about our topic today. So we'll give you just a minute or so to either use the QR code or the link here. The link is also in the chat. And then in just a moment, Bonnie is going to switch over to the Padlet so we can see what sorts of comments or questions people are placing in the Padlet. We will, at the end of the presentation during the Q&A, pull up the Padlet and then review what is there as well. So let's take just a minute or two to pause and give you all time to put your comments, questions into the Padlet. And I can see the Padlet. I see people are working. So that's exciting. I'm glad to see that.
I'm going to go ahead and move to the Padlet. Okay, cool. We got some good questions. All right. Some of these I think will be answered throughout the presentation, and then anything else we will pull up during the Q&A and go over in more detail.
Let me say
So,
one more comment about the Padlet before you move on. If you have not used Padlets before, you can like people's comments. So that would just be by, clicking on the little heart. You can also comment on other people's comments. So as we go through our presentation, if you see something and you want to comment on the Padlet before we get to the Q&A, please feel free to do so.
okay, I am going to get back to the presentation, but please continue to add questions to the Padlet and we will get to as many as we can. Okay. All right, so before we get into the construction and makeup of CVs and resumes, I first want to talk about application evaluation. This is something that I think gets skipped over a lot, and a lot of people don't understand how this impacts their resumes and cover letters or CVs. So when you submit an application, it first gets sent to HR, where they determine if the application meets minimum requirements. So degree requirements, years of experience, things like that. Materials that meet those requirements are then sent to a hiring manager or a lot of times a hiring committee. The committee then evaluates the application materials using some kind of scoring rubric. Over here at the College Station libraries, we call it the hiring matrix, and I've included this is just an example of a template, and then I've filled in a couple of these, and I'll talk about them shortly, about the different kind of ways that you can score. So one of the most important things to know about the hiring matrix is that the categories and language are pulled directly from job posting. So the purpose for this is to try to eliminate bias as much as possible so that it's very clear that everybody's getting scored based on the exact same criteria, so that there isn't any bias one way or another. So it's usually the required skills section and the preferred skills sections that are used to fill out these matrix. So you can only get points for things that are included on the rubric. So even if your application materials list a bunch of other cool skills, they don't necessarily add any points to your score if it isn't also included on the rubric. That's why it is extremely important to pay attention to keywords and specific phrases or specific language on the job posting and make sure that your application materials speak directly to those areas. This is particularly important when doing anything with the federal government, because applications they send for federal jobs, they get sent through an algorithm before it ever reaches a human being. And if you don't have enough keywords, or if your dates on the application aren't formatted in a way that the computer can understand, then the algorithm will spit out your application before it ever even gets to human eyes. Okay, so this is an example of our template for matrix. As you can see, minimum requirements doesn't meet 1. If it doesn't meet, then we don't even score any further. If it doesn't meet requirements, then that's it. There's a couple of ways that you can do points. For example, this one, you have different skills, and each skill has a certain number of points based on how important they are or how valuable they are to the position. So the total number of points available here is 7 if you have all of them. Whereas here, you can see it's done on a range of years of experience. So you get 1 point if you have 2 years or less, 2 points if you have 3 years or more, and 3 points if you have 5 years or more. So the total number of points is 3. In this example, it's kind of a stacked version. So if you don't have any experience with this, if you're familiar with it, or most beneficial is if you're familiar with it in the specific context of that job. So 2 would be the most points you could get here. Then after you have the points, each of these is weighted. So based on the level of importance that category is to the position, gives it a weight. So if you have all 7 points here, then you multiply it by 1 and that's 7. Whereas as you can see, project management in this example is the most important, which has a weight of 4. So if you have all 3 points here, multiplied by 4, the total number of points you can get in this category is 12. Now, this can get kind of complicated, and when you are on a hiring committee or a hiring manager, this takes a surprising amount of planning and math, frankly, to work through all of the points and how the values match up. All right. So, CVs and resumes. Curriculum vitae, Latin for course of life or the course of one's life. CVs are primarily used in academia, and the focus is on scholarly work. So research, presentations, publications, classes taught, grants that you've received, things like that. They also include the full extent of your academic history and credentials, which includes organizational committees, elected offices, working groups, etc. There's also no page length for CVs. So CVs are the full extent of your scholarly history, essentially. So there can be some CVs, if you have a really prolific researcher or publisher, their CV might be like a small book, because a CV is intended to be your entire scholarly history, scholarly work. Whereas for a resume is the most common form of application materials, like outside of academia. The focus is on your work history and skills rather than scholarly output. They are short, best practices, 2 pages. And that's why you need to tailor the resume to the position you're applying for. So from your work history, whatever your work history is or how many things you have in your work history, you want to highlight the work history that's most relevant to the position that you're applying for. And let me have a couple of examples. So these are mine. This is my resume and this is my CV. So for my resume, you have education, relevant work experience. I have some publications and presentations, but only ones that are relevant to the position that I'm applying for. Same with projects. I have a volunteering section, skills, and then organizational membership. Again, everything is tailored specifically to the job that I'm applying for at that time. Whereas my CV, you have your academic status, whatever institution you're working for, what your status is there, education. A lot of the stuff is similar. Professional experience, but this is specifically professional or library experience. And it's all of my professional or library experience. So any of my positions that are relevant are on here. Same with publications and presentations. You'll put any publications and presentations. It's not just related to what the position is. You also include all of your organizational membership, elected offices that you've held within your institution or any institution really, working groups, task forces, any leadership positions that you've held. And then some other miscellaneous things depending on kind of what your experience is, if you have anything else that you think would add to your credentials. So that's just a brief example. My CV isn't the best example because I don't have a ton of like publishing and I haven't taught any classes. So there's some stuff missing, but my CV is 4 pages, my resume is 2. So you can kind of see how the length differs. Okay. All right, so moving on. Notes about experience in particular, when you're talking about experience on a CV or a resume. One thing important is to use action verbs. And what I mean about when I say action verbs are, there are certain verbs that are better for highlighting certain types of experience. I've listed MIT. They have a really great page here that includes great action verbs for different types of skills that you're trying to highlight, whether it's communication skills, creative skills. So if you're ever, drafting a resume and you're kind of coming up blank with any good descriptive verbs for what you did at your job, it's always good to kind of find one of these action verb sites and you can get a lot of really great ideas. Okay, so then 2, focus on achievements more than responsibilities. So it's always more impactful if you can give a specific example of something that you completed or achieved rather than just listing responsibilities from your position description. For example, instead of, I managed the library's website, say I redesigned the library's website to ensure accessibility compliance. That was a project that I undertook and I completed. Or say instead of I managed the undergraduate outreach, you can say I planned and organized 4 undergraduate outreach events, including XYZ with X number of attendance or number of students. So it gives specific measurable details. It shows something that you actually completed, and it gives a much clearer picture of what your skills are based on outcomes rather than just saying, this is my responsibility. Something else is to include dates on everything. If there is no way to identify the amount of time you were doing something, then it doesn't count, essentially. You can be say you have experience as a director doing something. If you don't list the dates or the time that you spent as a director, then the hiring manager, hiring committee has no way of knowing how extensive that experience is. So were you a director for 3 months or were you a director for 3 years? And when we don't have that context, we can only default to the lowest assumption. So it's really important to have years on everything. Again, also, I mentioned federal stuff. For a computer, it has to have years or else it doesn't read it as experience at all. Okay. If you can demonstrate skills, do it. I kind of mentioned this with focus on achievements, but in particular, it's really good. And some of this can be more geared towards like a technology position, but it can be applied to any position and be really valuable. So having a portfolio website or being able to provide a demo of something or an example of something is way better than just saying I did this. As a hiring manager or committee, being able to see something tangible, like a tangible representation of your skills is always going to be more impactful. And that could be a website demonstrating tech skills. It could be a website or something that shows writing samples, or it could be links to LibGuides that you've created. There's a lot of different ways that you can provide tangible examples of your skills. The other one is tailor your experience to the job you're applying for. So how does your experience benefit you for this specific position? Don't just list all of your job duties that you had at that previous job. You want to describe your work experience of your previous job in a way that makes them relevant to the work you will be doing in the new job. So for example, if you are applying for a job that is a front desk position at a library and you have experience as a waitress or server, you don't want to just say, I waited tables at such and such restaurant. You want to talk about multitasking and communication and money handling and conflict resolution or customer de-escalation, opening and closing responsibilities. Did you do any training? There are a lot of ways to talk about experience of previous jobs in a way that speaks to how that experience will benefit you in the new position. There's a lot of transferable skills in pretty much any job. Okay, common mistakes. I kind of talked about this already, but I really want to drive home the importance of keywords. Application scoring is directly dependent on language used on the job posting. You only get points for what is on the matrix. If it doesn't matter what other experience you have. If it's not on the matrix, it doesn't count towards your score. And I shouldn't say it doesn't matter, but you don't get points if it's not on the matrix. On the flip side, if there's something on the matrix and you don't address it in either your application or in your resume or cover letter, then you are missing out on potential points. For federal jobs, as I mentioned, this is even more important. I've had several different federal jobs and I've applied to a lot of federal jobs, and I will copy verbatim what it says in the job posting. For example, if it says a requirement is X years of experience managing diverse teams in a fast-paced environment, then I have 4 years of experience managing diverse teams in a fast-paced environment. And then I might go into more detail or expand on that based on what I would normally put on a resume. Okay, so some other tips and advice. Keep it concise. Hiring managers have to go through a lot of these and they don't want to read paragraphs. This is kind of different between resumes and CVs in that CVs you want to list all of your things, but even within each experience, you can keep things concise in terms of bullet points, make sure that it's short and impactful. Hiring managers can have a lot of these to go through, and it's really hard to read paragraphs and paragraphs. And ultimately, what will likely happen is they'll just start to skim. And so if you want to make sure that the hiring manager is really paying attention to what you have to offer, then make it as easy as possible for them. Second, no sensitive information. I would hope that that would be obvious, but please do not have anything like age, medical information, marital status, things like that. The hiring manager doesn't need to know, they don't want to know, so just leave it off. Another tip is list your skills. So, and what I mean about this is hard skills in particular. Now, this is more important if there is some kind of technology component to your position. So if you're dealing with any kind of software or computer things, it's really important if you have a tech job to list any like programming languages you're familiar with, any communication tools you use, but it can also be used for other things like methodologies. Are you familiar with Agile? Do you have any, if you're familiar with any curriculum methodologies that are helpful, just make sure that they are stuck to hard skills and not soft skills. Soft skills, there's no way of really evaluating the value of them, even especially without context to your job experience. So keep it to hard skills. Avoid fancy resumes. And by fancy, I mean photos, color, interesting formats, weird fonts. It might initially look nicer, but it's wasted space. It pulls attention. A lot of it creates categories that remove context and then deplete the value of the content. I already said don't use photos. So unless you have a design specific job and you want to demonstrate your design skills with your resume, then these fancy types of resumes are not helpful. And although some people might think that it helps stand out, it doesn't stand out in a helpful way. For recent grads, This one's important for anybody applying to a entry-level position, or if you're a recent graduate. If you don't have a lot of previous work experience, then make sure to include either transcripts if you can, or on your resume, have relevant coursework. One of the really hard things for hiring entry-level positions and hiring people straight out of grad school without a lot of work experience is trying to identify aptitude. So we aren't necessarily always looking for all of the experience, but we're trying to find somebody who can be taught and somebody who has an interest and aptitude in the position. So if you don't have anything that indicates that kind of information, then we're kind of selecting blind. Okay, and then maintain a master resume. So I have a document that is several pages long and lists every position I have ever held as an adult. And it makes it way easier when you are applying to new jobs or having to do anything requiring to know what your work experience is, to be able to go back to that document, pull out that job, the dates, and then just tailor it for whatever I'm applying to, instead of having to try to remember, where did I work? What were my responsibilities at that job? What years did I work there? It just makes everything super, super easy. Okay, now, Kelly.
Okay, so let's talk for a minute about why your cover letter should be more than what you are seeing on the screen here. And trust me when I say we get a lot of cover letters that look just like this, and they are not helpful at all. So a cover letter is written to explain things that are relevant to the position you are applying for, but they are not included on your resume or your CV. For example, you are applying for a head chef position, but you have zero formal training as a head chef. With a cover letter, you can explain how your years of experience as a chef at Meals on Wheels provides the necessary experience, because with that job, you planned menus, ordered supplies, and managed a staff of 20 in addition to 10 volunteers. Now, obviously, I made up that example, but I think you get the point. Now, let's talk about some specifics. When you are writing your cover letter, you need to think about these 4 things: interest, qualifications, length, and make sure you proofread. So when you are thinking about the interest category, you are going to want to share why you are interested in this position. You can also use this moment to show that you've done a bit of background into the organization, and you can explain how you would be a great fit for their culture. You can show how you can make a unique contribution to their organization. And this is where you can address any gaps in employment. For example, after an extended sabbatical where I finished writing my best-selling book, How to Be Quiet Yet Loud Throughout Your Library Career, I am now ready to re-enter the workforce. Now, when we talk about qualifications, this is where you want to talk about things that aren't covered in your resume or your CV. Example 1, and this is a non-library related example, but I'm going to share it as a way for you to think outside of the box. Let's say this position requires coaching a track team at the summer camp. You have never been a coach, but you are an avid runner and you have years of experience training and running in road races, and you have even done a marathon. You can use this to your advantage and explain how that would allow you to successfully coach the track team. Now, this example is library related. This position requires marketing, and you have no formal training in marketing, but as a school librarian, you successfully marketed events such as book fairs and things like reading promotions. Use that to your advantage and explain how that would allow you to accomplish the marketing tasks required by this position. Think outside of the box when it comes to necessary and preferred skills that you do not possess, and try to address that in your cover letter. You do have skills that are transferable, like Bonnie mentioned earlier. Even though you may not have the exact thing, if you explain how the skills you do have are transferable and applicable, that may be the thing that gets you the points and or the interview, because the cover letter is where hiring teams are able to score additional items that are not covered in the resume or the CV. When it comes to length of your cover letter, you want to be brief, yet informative and interesting. I would suggest no longer than 1 page, but this can be a judgment call. The longer the cover letter, the less likely they are to read it in full or stay fully engaged. I remember one, I don't know if this would be called a cover letter, but this person had just submitted so much documentation about all of their accomplishments and things that it was very, very difficult to try to even get through it all. And then finally, on proofreading, please do not make the mistake of misspelling the name of the library or the institution. Also, I have seen cover letters come through where it was obvious that the applicant, which was using one letter for all of their applications, which is fine, but they forgot to change something. So make sure you are proofreading and double checking all of your work. If you are using a cover letter that is sort of general, but you're changing it for each application, make sure that you are checking, your cover letter. Did you apply for a cataloging position, but in the cover letter, you're talking about a reference position? All right. And now Bonnie is going to share some additional resources.
Okay, so we have a list here of resources on both resume writing as well as a cover letter. So we have The Cut has how to write a cover letter that will get you a job, which is a great resource. We have Ask a Manager is a site that has, oops, let's try that again. There we go. Has quite a few resources related to resumes, cover letters, applications in general, hiring. We have a couple of resources from there, both on writing a resume as well as cover letters. And then I also included the link to the MIT action verb site, maybe. Yeah. So those are some additional resources to help you either get started or to help get some tips for adjusting things. All right. Q&A. So let's, see if I can do this without going somewhere weird. Okay. All right, cool. All right. So I guess we can just kind of start working through these and see. We have 12 minutes, 11 minutes, cool. I guess before we get into the Padlet, does anybody have any like burning question that they wanted to ask?
I have a question that probably doesn't really have an answer, but why do you think it's so hard? Like, where's the disconnect between people who are applying for positions today that they're not aware of, at least in the academic library world? I can't speak for the wider world or anything, that like this isn't understood, like how to write an effective cover letter, how to write an effective resume or CV. Why do you think there's like such a decline? Because I remember being taught this stuff, and
I know that, so I was kind of a non-trad when I went to grad school, for example, And so it was later on in my career. And I remember not getting taught really anything like this. The only way that I knew what I knew was because I had my advisor review my materials. And then he ended up giving me this great document, sort of like a template for how to write a resume, what pieces should be in there. So it's really, for me, been just other people giving me tips, other people who are either above me or smarter than me, telling me what's best to do. So I don't think it's really taught.
My experience is that resumes are definitely taught, but CVs are not, unless you're maybe some grad schools teach it. None of mine did. In fact, my most recent one did, we did portfolios, and that seems to be taught a lot, especially because it was tech related, but I had the same experience as Kelly, being a school librarian, transferring to academic and being like, here's my resume and here's my short cover letter. And but I had a portfolio, so that was good.
Yeah. Lillian has her hand up.
Yeah, I just graduated from the Syracuse High School, and my last class, it was an elective academic librarianship. Our big assignment, I think it was a third of our grade, was to do a whole hiring packet. And we had to do research on the institution, and it was so involved. I think I still have the syllabus. I mean,
Wow.
she wanted us to, I did it on Tarrant County Community College, and I know how many branches there are, where they're located, who they serve, what they do, so it is taught. I mean, it was taught there, but that was an elective. So perhaps that's something schools can teach in one of the required courses, although they're already jam-packed. How
Right.
valuable do you think that is? And does it matter? I would think it doesn't get you in the door, but it helps you during the interview process.
Which part?
Doing an in-depth study of the
Yeah.
institution that you are applying for.
How in depth, I think, is a judgment call, but I think definitely knowing what they do, what kind of their focus is, anything you know about the institution where you can tailor a resume or cover letter to speak to what they do is going to have a leg up, especially if you can even like incorporate something of theirs into your presentation or your cover letter, saying, I really like this part or this collection, or, you know, something like that. Showing enough of an effort to look into it is helpful. Okay, let's get into some of these questions. So,
Sorry to interrupt, but Michael
yeah,
has
go ahead.
his hands up.
Oh,
I'd raised my hand. I couldn't find the hand raise button in Zoom. Bonnie, I'm wondering, you know, you guys have talked about a lower standard of application materials coming through, and especially in the academic library realm. But do you feel that academic libraries are also, in recent years, lowering their standards, or at least adjusting their expectations for more non-traditional types of CV or resume? I feel that, largely when I'm applying to academic library jobs, I'm submitting something more of a resume rather than a CV, regardless of what they're asking. And I'm not sure that I've ever felt like it was a major handicap. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
for most, or at least most places that I've seen, they ask for a CV or a resume. Obviously, if it's a faculty librarian position, it would be more beneficial to provide a CV because that's the content that would be more valuable. Research history, publication history, presentations, things like that will give you more of a leg up in that context. But I don't necessarily think that not having a CV is completely detrimental to getting a job. I think, as we've all said I mentioned it, Kelly mentioned it, Pam mentioned it, like we all came from non-academic places and essentially had a resume when we've got our first academic position. Okay, so let's just start at the front here, wondering how to convert resume to CV. So I think there's a lot of overlap. I think the biggest difference is length and the number of things that you include. Like we said, a resume, you're wanting it shorter, so you really have to pick and choose what you put on there, whereas a CV is intended to be a kind of full representation. The other thing is you would definitely include more on a CV related to obviously research, anything scholarly, but then you would also include institutional committees, working groups, leadership positions within a specific institution that you might not include on a resume. Because a resume, you might include like professional membership, but not necessarily get that in depth.
And I didn't find that difficult to do when I was converting my resume to a CV. And it wasn't as time consuming as I thought it might be. I really just went and Googled CV format or, something like that to get some examples to look at. And then I just took my information from my resume and adjusted it, I guess you would say, to fit the CV format, and then added the things that it needed to have. So it's not a difficult process.
And some institutions will have a template for you. For example, Texas A&M has a CV template that you can use, and it already has kind of the sections, and then you just kind of fill in where you need to fill in. Okay, some of these we answered in the presentation. If your publications are not relevant to the job you are applying for, should you include them on your CV? Yes, you should include them on your CV, not on a resume, but a CV should be your complete academic or scholarly output. Let's see. Preferred lengths, we mentioned that. When do you need to redo a CV or resume versus just update it?
I don't know that you necessarily need to redo it unless maybe something from your institution, like Bonnie mentioned, they have a template. If your template has somehow changed, I think if you are just constantly keeping it up to date, then that is enough.
A CV is something that you can more easily just add to as you go, whereas a resume, you don't necessarily need to start new, but it should be changed for each position you're applying to. You should very rarely have the exact same resume that you're submitting to multiple jobs. They should always be tailored, which is time consuming and frustrating, but
I was also going to add that, sometimes updating it in terms of redoing it is just kind of updating the look and feel of it. I know from when I started 7 years ago, my resume format wise, visually looks very different. And while it doesn't have pictures or anything like that, like just kind of sometimes updating the format and look of it to make it look more current, kind of looking and seeing what other resumes and CVs might look like, so it's not just a block of text or anything. So in terms of redoing, sometimes I think for a couple of years you might want to give it a facelift, but it doesn't necessarily change anything about the information that's in it. It's just how you're maybe presenting it. In terms of redoing.
let's see. Are there any best practices for balancing between providing too many or too few details about your prior work experience? I kind of mentioned this, concise is better. Anything that you can easily look through as a hiring manager is a lot better than having to read full paragraphs of text, but you do want relevant information in there. So try to be as concise as possible, but valuable information. I've heard a lot of different advice about the format of cover letters. Some say it should be paragraphs, some say it should be bullet points. I've always used paragraphs. I've never used bullet points as cover letter. I've only ever used full paragraphs as a letter style. Kelly, do you have any?
As a hiring manager, either style is going to be fine for me. What makes it easier to read and get the information I need is what's going to be best. If you presenting your information in bullet points does that, then that's going to be fine. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. You're not going to get points taken off because you use bullets instead of a paragraph. I mean, because you'll have some paragraphs in there.
Let's see, how do you express non-position skills or accomplishments in resume cover letters that are applicable to the position you're applying to, i.e. you're part of a gaming group and have a coordinated schedules, communicate with people? I think there's a couple of ways. I think it's in a resume, you can have a skills section where you talk about some of those things. You can also add kind of miscellaneous categories, whether it's projects, whether it's volunteers work. You can add sort of non-traditional categories if you have experience that you need to communicate in another area. That's not necessarily a bad thing to do. And likewise with, that's a good place to use a cover letter. What is the best way to illustrate title changes if you're still in the same workplace? For me, Kelly, you might correct me. For me, if it's a different position or has different responsibilities, then I'll have it as a separate position.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what I would do as well.
Should you add classes you've taken or earn CE credit for professional development? For a resume, I think it depends on how much room you have on the resume and how valuable that is to the position you're applying to. For a CV, you have space. So I will include any professional development or continuing education that I've done that is relevant to scholarly output for a CV. I don't think that's ever a bad thing to include.
Yeah, especially if it's something that is, maybe it's a preferred requirement on the job description or the job posting, and you've had a class in that, I would definitely find a way to make sure that that is made known in your cover letter or somewhere.
There's also a lot of things in job postings that will mention like an interest in development, or they'll want to know that you're interested in improving yourself professionally. So showing that you regularly complete continuing education gives them that information.
Yeah.
How often should you update your resume? Anytime you get a new job. Regularly, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really hard to try to go back and backtrack. I would, try to do it once a year, once every 6 months, something like that. Some regular schedule.
Yes. What is your experience with tech reading your CV? Do you use buzzwords? Any tips? Okay, so I kind of went over that. For federal government, it's very important to use very strict keywords, phrases. For non-federal, it's still important to, well, for non-federal, it's not a computer reading it anymore. It's humans, so that's not quite the same thing, but you still want keywords and make sure that you are addressing anything that is listed in the job posting. Okay, that's all the Padlet. Does anybody else have anything, any questions? Did I miss any as I was looking through here?
If you guys have additional questions or want to follow up with us, please feel free to reach out, email us. Our contact information is included on the slides. And we really appreciate you all being here today and being the audience for us. Thank you.
Yes,
All
thank
right.
you, Bonnie. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you so much for your presentation today. I dropped the survey link in the chat, so please be sure to fill out the survey. And I hope everyone has a fantastic lunch and hope to see you back after lunch for the next couple of sessions.
Thank you, Jillian.